Good morning, good afternoon. Lovely to be here together. One of the sutras that we chant Tuesday evenings, one of the verses is merging of difference and unity. And when we chant it quite fast, sort of like this. The mind of the great sage of India is intimately communicated between East and West. People's faculties may be keen or dull, but in the path there are no southern or northern ancestors, and so on. When we chant like that, there really isn't an opportunity to reflect on the meaning of the words. It's kind of too fast, with no gaps. But it sort of allows the teachings just to flow into us. You know, when people have been sitting for years, they've chanted that hundreds, thousands of times, and it just flows through their bodies and it just gets memorized. And then over time, usually there's just a moment. It's interesting how this occurs. You're just chanting away, and then you just see a part of a sentence and go, I actually don't know what that means. I don't know what that's about. And it's kind of lovely when that happens, or you have a bit of an idea, but you're not too sure. And then off we go, and we look it up somewhere, or we talk to someone, or we just reflect on it. And over time, eventually, we go through the whole of the verses, or the songs, or the sutras, and the chants, and we start to look at all the lines and not make our own meaning, but understand it for ourselves. We start to understand it for ourselves. So this one, merging of difference and unity, I thought I would go through it sort of line by line, and we'll see how far we get. Probably, maybe it'll take a couple of different talks to get through the whole thing. So right there in the title, merging of difference and unity. Difference is all the diversity in the world, all the things that we see and hear, all the thoughts that we have, this abundance of difference. And unity is how all of those abundant things really have no edges to them, and on close examination and reflection are completely unified and interdependent. So this verse is about merging those two experiences that we have, those two truths that we are taught in many different ways through the teachings, and the middle way teachings of Nagarjuna. In fact, this morning I read an article of the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, talking about his middle way approach of responding to China's occupation of Tibet, and how you could tip one way and just let it all go and just get absorbed, culturally and religiously absorbed, or you could go the other way and raise arms and fight to the bitter end. And all these decades, His Holiness has just kept this middle way of negotiating, holding the differences between the two countries and the similarities between them, the need for the two to cooperate. And he's held that for all these decades. It's really extraordinary that he's never wavered. And the result of that skillful means of his is that Tibetan Buddhism has flourished all around the world. And even more recently in China, more and more ordinary Chinese citizens are wanting to learn about Tibetan Buddhism. So this teaching is very applicable to our ordinary lives. It's not just an abstract idea. Those of us who have been hanging out with this teaching for a long time can attest that life is easier to navigate when you're kind of walking along this edge, and sometimes you have to tip a little towards form, a little towards the difference. Sometimes you tip a little towards unity, oneness, interdependence, as the circumstance requires. You tip a little bit one way, tip a little bit the other way, and recalibrate. So if you're sort of walking along and you come across a snake, here in Australia it would be, something like a brown snake. In America it might be a rattlesnake. You would tip in that moment towards difference. You would go like, oh, I don't think I really want to interact with that snake. It's not a good combination. I'm going to step back. You would tilt towards difference. And then once you'd moved past, you could go back to feeling unified with your environment. But you would momentarily tip. And you could tip the other way if you were in a conversation with someone and they said something you disagreed with. You might find yourself tipping towards difference, like, uh-oh, I didn't really think they thought that way. I don't like that thought. And then we would start tip towards unity. And remember, we're all just people trying to navigate the world as best as we can. And we all do it in different ways, and you would tip towards finding commonality with that person so that you didn't split into a dualistic way of interacting with them. So all throughout the day, just tipping a little one way or the other way as needed. So, merging of difference and unity. Sandokai, it's called Sandokai, written by Shito in the 8th century. He was a disciple Dharma heir of Huineng, 6th ancestor in China. And I've got these are my spare glasses. They're kind of orange. I forgot my regular glasses. So it feels a little strange to be wearing orange tinted glasses, but there you go. And I think I've mentioned this book before, Shohaku Okumura's book, Living by Vow. It goes through 8 of the different chants that we use in the Soto tradition and kind of unpacks them. So I would recommend that book if sometime. It's fairly comfortable to read. It's not too difficult to read. So let's see. It begins with the mind of the great sage of India is intimately communicated between East and West. People's faculties may be keen or dull, but in the path there is no southern or northern ancestors. So right there at the beginning, we've got these kind of pairings, north and south, keen and dull, east and west. But in the path, there are not those dualities. There are not those differences on this path. Or we can incorporate those differences. So whether you're keen or dull, whether you have a great intellect or not, whether you have gone to university or not, whether you are quick with your tongue or not, whether you can read fluently or not, these things don't matter for understanding the nature of reality. Really, all that's required is a sincerity to want to understand and to want to be of benefit. That's all we need, really. And we can even have sort of emotional issues We can still have emotional issues and study and deepen our relationship with the Dharma. We don't have to have everything sorted out. We can have troubles at home, and we can still study the Dharma. So no special talent is required. We're enough just as we are. The northern and southern school, of course, sort of refers to a long discussion that's gone on for centuries about sudden and gradual. And the way we tend to think about it, or the way I think about it and many others think about it, is that we're always blending gradual and sudden. There's gradual training that we do. We take the precepts, we try to live a wholesome life. We do meditation every day, we study, so gradual refinement, polishing the stone. We do that. And we also see that we are perfectly fine just as we are, and nothing needs to be done at all. Buddha nature is pervading the whole universe. Nothing needs to be improved. So again, it's a kind of a balancing of these two different ways, sudden and gradual, southern and northern. So the next lines, the spiritual source shines clearly in the light, branching streams flow in the darkness. Spiritual source, we can think of that as unity, oneness, emptiness, the spiritual source. Everything is unified. That shines clearly in the light. So light and dark get used in a couple of different ways. In the merging of difference in unity, light is referring to all the things being in the light so we can see them, like trees and grass and people and chairs and stools, like these new ones. We've got some new stools. The laptop is sitting on a new beautiful stool, a little table maybe. We've got special little tables now for our bells as well. So all of that's in the light. So the spiritual source, you could say, the unity of all things is seen in the light of all the particular things. We see it in the light. So we don't have to be sitting we don't have to be sitting always like still with our eyes closed to see the unity of all things. We do that, but we also can just open our eyes and see it right in the light. Spiritual source shines clearly in the light. It doesn't sort of like vaguely show up in the light. It shines clearly and brightly in the light. And then branching streams flow in the darkness. So darkness in this context, darkness is a sort of representation of non-differentiation. In the pitch dark, nothing is differentiated. In the pitch dark, you don't distinguish one thing from another thing. Everything is dark. So in this context, this is darkness, is the non-differentiation. So the branching streams, like we've used this image a lot. Water, when water falls out of the sky and lands on the mountain, it gathers into rivulets. Lots of little rivulets come together. At other spots, it splits apart again and flows in different ways. And water springs up from under the ground and runs down. There's all these branching streams. The one element, water, branches and splits into many, many different streams and rejoins again. So all of that difference is there in the darkness. The branching streams flow. They flow in the darkness. They don't hobble along barely making it. They flow in the darkness. And we, taken from this verse, there's an organisation called Branching Streams, which is of the Soto Zen centres from around the world. It was kind of mostly in the United States, but it is spreading and we're now part of that. So if you go to the Branching Streams website, they've got a little map and you can sort of zoom out the map and there is Twining Vines in Canberra, Australia on their map. So we are part of these Branching Streams, the organisation, and we are part of Branching Streams in the world. So the next two lines, grasping things is basically delusion. Merging with principle is still not enlightenment. So grasping things is basically delusion. I think all of us here would know from great experience that grasping things is pretty delusional. I think we all know that. When you try to grasp something that is impermanent and you try to hold on to it, it's probably going to turn out badly. Oh dear. It's kind of comedic, isn't it, that we grasp at things that are conditional and that will fall apart, but we do it. And it's okay that we do it. It's kind of a little easier if we do it understanding that it is a bit delusional and that we probably will suffer somewhat in that process, but we're choosing to do it anyway. That's okay, we can do that. We can grasp a little less tightly. And we can remember too that many people grasp at things. And we can have compassion and feel care for the pain that causes. Some things we just can't help grasping, and we grasp anyway. It kind of takes courage. It's like it takes courage to love. When we love things, we know that it's probably going to hurt at some point, but we do it anyway. So there's a dignity. There's still a dignity in loving. There is dignity, obviously, in loving things, but even in grasping them a little bit, it's just holding that knowledge that there is a delusion in that grasping. Just have to hold that and know. But then if we tip too far the other side, merging with principle, and we merge just too much with the non-self, non-otherness of things, we merge too much with that is not actually enlightenment. There's kind of two ways that we look at enlightenment as well. There's finding this balance, which this whole text is about, finding this balance between form and emptiness, the conventional and the ultimate, or the consummate, the relative and the absolute, finding the balance between those two, holding those two together, like two sides of a coin, like everything has, it kind of requires its opposite. Light requires dark. Any surface requires another side to the surface. So holding the truth of that, that's one way we think about an enlightened mind. And then Dogen also teaches us that just practice itself is enlightenment, just sitting zazen. We don't have to hold anything. We don't have to balance anything. And the next line is, each sense and every field interact and do not interact. So each sense and every field interact and do not interact. The first five senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, those first five interact with the phenomena of the world. They interact with the objects of the world. And then the sixth sense, the mind, interacts with thoughts. And just a sort of interesting side note about thoughts that I enjoy contemplating is the other senses are interacting with things that sort of do appear, like lamps and zabutons and trees. The senses interact with things that appear or that we can smell or feel, but the mind can actually kind of create things that aren't there. I was thinking about how children seem to really like unicorns and really like dinosaurs. And when I was a child, I really liked Pegasus. It's interesting that there's this kind of pull towards sort of fanciful things, that our mind actually likes creating things. And a couple of images that are used in Zen to describe this is that we can think a thought like hairs on a turtle or horns on a rabbit. We can have that thought. We can imagine horns on a rabbit or hairs on a turtle. We can do that. But there's not a rabbit with horns. But we can imagine it. So I think it can be just a good reflection to be aware that our mind can create all sorts of thoughts. And they're constructions in our mind that have some bearing on the phenomena in the world, but we can mix and mash them together and create whole new ideas. And people do that about each other. They come up with ideas about each other that are actually not at all what the other person is, maybe what's motivating that other person. We come up with an idea of what motivates someone to do what they do, and that is not what is motivating them to do what they do. But we do think that. So if we can have just a little humility about that we're actually inventing things, and be very careful, be really careful with our thoughts. So our senses and our mind are sort of interacting with the environment. They're all interacting with each other. If we didn't have all of this phenomena to look at, it would be hard for our mind to think. It would be hard. Then it also says the six senses and every field interact and do not interact. So the do not interact is really referring to the emptiness teachings in the Heart Sutra, that although there appears to be an experiencer, myself, who is experiencing something that's experienced over there, in fact, there really isn't an experiencer, and there isn't anything being experienced. We can kind of rest in the experiencing, but the idea of an experiencer and an object being experienced, on close examination, we can't find either of those things as separate entities. So the 6 senses and the 6 fields interact and also do not interact. And then the next line is, when interacting, they also merge, otherwise they remain in their own states. And Shohaku Okumura points out that the word when is just a little bit problematic because it makes it sound as if it happens sometimes but not other times. But that's just sort of the way it's been sort of translated and the way it flows in English. So he sort of suggests just don't put emphasis on the word when. But it's just hard in English not to say when. When interacting, they also merge. It's a bit hard to find another way to say it. So when things are interacting, they also merge. This is, this sense that we can't really find a boundary between ourselves and other things. On close examination, we can't find a boundary. Otherwise, they remain in their own states. There's a beautiful teaching on we all land, we all are in our dharma position. So even though all things merge, each thing has its dharma position. So an eye is not an ear. And I'm not Dirk, for example, I'm Neti. And Dirk is Dirk. So we have our dharma position. And we should love and embrace our dharma position. Nobody can be us other than us. The particular unique individual that we are. Nobody else can do that job but us. And really the world benefits if we wholeheartedly embrace who we are and do the best to fully express and share who we are with the world. That's our dharma position. Then the next lines, forms are basically different in material and appearance. Sounds are fundamentally different in pleasant or harsh quality. So there's only 2 mentioned here, forms and sounds, but of course it applies to the other senses, but he's just taken 2 examples here. Forms are basically different in material and appearance. I think we can just see that. There's great diversity in the world. In fact, every single thing is different. No 2 things are the same at all, no matter how similar they look. Everything is different. And we can develop a real appreciation and not take anything for granted. Not at all. Even if you see, if you see a whole bunch of tables and chairs, they're all different to each other. You can still really appreciate the particular chair that you pull out and sit on. Even if there's 20 more of them, they're all have been produced in a factory. This particular little stand that we now have is just beautiful. Even though superficially there's probably tens of thousands of them being pumped out of a factory somewhere. But each one is just so beautiful. We can develop that relationship to just ordinary things. Everything is different. And we can just not take any of that for granted. And then the next line, sounds are fundamentally different in pleasant or harsh quality. I was a bit curious about the word fundamental being used here, because fundamental can sound a little bit like essentially, but just looking up the different meanings of the word fundamental, it can also just mean centrally important, rather, important. Fundamentally can just mean important. So I think that's how it's being used here. It's important to remember that sounds can be pleasant or harsh or neutral. We often say those three. And, everything in between, from really harsh to just like slightly uncomfortable and irritating, to neutral of no particular consequence, to a little bit enjoyable, to something maybe we really want to grasp at. So that includes, applies to all the other senses. Here's just the example of sound. We can relate to that in a number of ways. We can relate to it compassionately towards ourselves and to others. That experiences are sometimes harsh. We can keep a warm heart towards the harsh experiences of the world that we and others go through. And then we can also cultivate a kind of capacity to move with those harsh experiences, or even just slightly what feel like just off the mark experiences. Sometimes things just don't quite go the way you want, the way we want. Just a little off the mark, a little disappointing in some way. We can just work with that. We can be okay with that, rather than having aversion to it. I think I will stop there. I think that's somewhere close to about halfway. Oh, but actually I did want to read, just read a couple of paragraphs from Shohaku Okumura's book. This is a couple of paragraphs on holding both sort of discrimination and non-discrimination. Because of our upbringing, we can easily see our individuality. So the first thing we have to learn is to see the universality of our life. We need to be able to see that we share our life with other people, with all beings in the whole universe. That is the meaning of interdependence, one of the main teachings of the Buddha. But if we cling to that perspective and call it enlightenment, it's a mistake. The Buddha taught that we must see the reality of our life from both sides. Our Zazen practice is to awaken to the reality prior to separation. Ordinarily, we see things from one perspective or the other. When we sit, we let go of thoughts and all particular perspectives. We don't grasp anything. That doesn't mean that we have to extinguish thought. Thought is always there as we experience our life, even when sitting in this posture. Our mind often seems busier than usual when we sit in a quiet place. In fact, our body and mind are busier and noisier in everyday life. But since our environment is also noisy, we don't notice the commotion inside ourselves. When we come to a quiet place, however, we hear even the smallest noise. When we sit in the zendo, we can hear the sound of the clock, the sounds our bodies make, coming from within us. The sounds our bodies make coming from within us become more noticeable, and it seems that our mind is noisier than usual. I think that's a good sign of our practice. We hear this noise because our mind is beginning to calm down. Of course, we should let go of the internal noise. We should neither cling to nor try to escape from the noise. We should just be awake and let it go. Let all thoughts, feelings, and daydreams simply come and go freely. Everything is moving, nothing stays forever. Just let everything be with you. In Zazen, you should keep this upright posture, breathe quietly through the nose, and let go of everything. We don't try to control anything. Just keep this posture and let go. This is how darkness and light manifest. Thought is still there, yet we don't think. It's a difficult point to explain. It's like when you are driving a car and shift into neutral. The engine is moving, but the car doesn't go anywhere. In our Zazen, we put our mind in neutral. Thought is there, but we are not moved by it. My teacher, Uchiyama Roshi, said, "Thought is just a secretion from our brain. Thought is not a poison, but if you grasp and are controlled by it, it becomes poisonous." We actualize both darkness and light when we open our hand of thought and are not moved. That is sitting practice. Our Zazen is not a method to contemplate reality which has lightness and dark. It is a way to manifest both darkness and light. We are not the observer, but rather the reality itself. So let's stop there and